There's a moment, and if you've ever stood near the gates of St. James's Palace on a cold Tuesday morning, you might know exactly what I mean. There's a moment when the whole city feels like it's holding its breath. Not because something beautiful is happening, because something wrong is. And nobody around you seems to notice except you. This story isn't about a hero. It's not about someone saving a life or stopping a crime. It's about a man who stood completely still while the world around him turned into a circus. And what I saw in his eyes just once, just for half a second, has stayed with me for almost 2 years. I need to tell you about Thomas. Not because he asked me to. He doesn't know I'm writing this. He doesn't know I watched the whole thing unfold from the coffee shop across the road, my cappuccino going cold in my hand, my notebook sitting open but untouched on the table beside me. He doesn't know that I've thought about that Tuesday morning probably 300 times since it happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I was in London for work. A research project, nothing glamorous, just interviews and archive visits and a lot of time on the tube staring at strangers' shoes. My hotel was a 20-minute walk from St. James's Palace, which meant I walked past it nearly every morning for 11 days. The first time I saw Thomas, well, I didn't know his name then. I found that out later. I didn't think much of it. You see the guards and your brain just files them away. Tall man, red coat, bearskin hat, part of the scenery. That sounds terrible to say, but it's honest. Most people who walk past these guards every day treat them like living landmarks, like red telephone boxes that breathe. It was the third morning when I started actually watching him. Not him specifically at first. I was watching the tourists. I had 40 minutes before my first interview, and I'd bought a coffee from the small cafe on the opposite side of the street. The one with the green awning and the slightly uneven stools, and I was just sitting there in the window watching people move past. October in London has this particular quality to the light. It comes in low and golden in the mornings, cuts through the plane trees and hits the pale stone of the palace walls, and everything looks simultaneously ancient and sharp, like a photograph that hasn't decided whether it wants to be old or new. There were maybe 30 or 40 people gathered near the guards' post that morning, a normal crowd for that time of day, families with pushchairs, a school group in matching yellow vests being herded by a frantic teacher, couples taking photos, the usual. And then there were the others, the ones with ring lights. I noticed the first one because of the equipment. He was maybe 22, 23, slim, stylish, wearing a cream-colored jacket that had no business being worn on a cold October morning without a layer underneath, but he wore it anyway because it looked good on camera. He had a small tripod, a phone mounted on top, a ring light clipped to the side of the phone, and a tiny wireless microphone pinned to his lapel. He set up about 4 feet from the guard's post. Right there, 4 feet, close enough that if the guard had stretched out his arm, he could have touched the man's shoulder. The guard Thomas, though I didn't know his name yet, stood absolutely still, eyes forward, face like carved limestone. He was tall, genuinely tall, the kind of tall that looks even taller with the bearskin on top, and he had a stillness to him that I can only describe as deliberate. Like every muscle in his body had been trained not just to stay still but to mean it. The young man with the ring light started filming. And here's the thing, here's the part that made me put down my coffee. He started talking about Thomas like Thomas wasn't there. So here I am at St. James's Palace and look at this guy, right? He literally cannot move. Like legally cannot. Watch this. He stepped closer, 2 feet now. I'm gonna see how close I can get before he reacts. Thomas did not react. Not a flicker, not a twitch. The eyes stayed forward. The man laughed into his camera. Nothing. Absolute stone cold. Okay, I'm gonna try something. He pulled out, and I genuinely couldn't believe this when I saw it, a small rubber duck. A yellow rubber duck, the kind you'd find in a toddler's bathtub. He held it up next to Thomas's face and made a squeaking sound. The crowd around them laughed. A few people took out their own phones. Thomas stared forward. His jaw tightened, just slightly, just once. That was the first time I noticed his face was doing something that his body wasn't. I want to try to explain what it looks like. This particular variety of being filmed without your consent. When you're a person who has chosen to serve, who has drilled and trained and prepared for years, who stands at a post that carries genuine weight and history and meaning, and someone holds a rubber duck next to your face and laughs at you for thousands of strangers on the internet. I don't think people who do it think about what it feels like. I genuinely don't think the thought crosses their mind. The guard is a prop. The guard is a challenge. The guard is content. And content doesn't feel things. That's the unspoken logic of it. The dehumanization is so casual it isn't even recognized as dehumanization. The young man finished his clip, packed up his ring light, and walked away looking pleased with himself. He probably got 100,000 views on that video, maybe more. I looked it up months later. Different versions of exactly this kind of video rack up millions of views. The comments are always the same. Lol, he didn't move. Legend. Rent-free. Imagine having to stand there and put up with that. That last one, ironically, is the most honest comment in the whole section. Because yes, imagine it. The school group had moved on by now. The crowd had thinned slightly. It was about 9:30 in the morning, and the low October light had shifted a fraction, less golden now, more gray as a thin sheet of cloud moved in from the west. Thomas stood at his post. He'd been there since 8, I later found out. The guards rotate, but the rotations aren't as frequent as people assume. Depending on the day and the ceremonial schedule, a guard can be at their post for an hour and a half at a stretch, standing, not moving, in full uniform. An hour and a half. Of that, while people point cameras at you. I'd been watching for about 25 minutes at this point, and I'd already counted 7 separate people filming him. 7. In 25 minutes. Each one a slightly different flavor of the same thing. Some were polite about it. They stood at a respectful distance and took their photo quietly and moved on, which is fine. That's part of the territory, nobody disputes that. But 4 of the 7 were content creators of some kind. 2 had ring lights. One had a friend filming him from a second angle so they could get a reaction shot of his own face alongside the guard. One was a woman who stood 6 inches from Thomas's shoulder and narrated in a whisper, like she was David Attenborough observing a rare species in the wild. And here we see the royal guard in his natural habitat, not moving, not blinking, just existing. She said existing like it was something amusing and small. Like it was something less than what she was doing. I missed my interview. I know, but I couldn't leave. Something was building and I could feel it the way you can feel a storm building even when the sky still looks mostly fine. There was something about Thomas's face, that jaw, that almost imperceptible tightening that made me stay in my seat and keep watching. I ordered a second coffee. The barista, a young Polish woman named, I saw from her badge, Marta, followed my gaze out the window. "The guard," she said. I nodded. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sigh. "He gets this every day," she said. "Every single day. I've been working here 14 months. Same thing every morning." She set the coffee down on the counter in front of me. "One time," she said, "someone threw a chip at him. A chip from a bag of crisps. Just threw it at him to see what would happen." I stared at her. She nodded. He didn't move, a pause, but his hands. She made a very slight gesture with her fingers, a closing, a tightening. His hands did. She went back to the coffee machine. I turned back to the window. It was approaching 10 o'clock when the next group arrived. I say group because there were 3 of them together, young men, late teens or very early 20s, all with phones out, all with that particular energy that a group has when they're filming each other filming things. They fed off each other's boldness. That's how it works. Alone, each one of them might have just taken a photo and moved on. But together, they escalated each other without even trying. The tallest one, he had a gray hoodie and expensive trainers, went first. He stood next to Thomas and pulled a face at his own camera. Peace sign, tongue out, standard. The second one, shorter, in a blue puffer jacket, went closer. He started doing a commentary. Right, so we're at the palace, we've got the guy here, mate, you all right? You doing good? Blink once if you need help. Laughter from his friends. Thomas did not blink once. The third one, and this is the one that changed the morning, walked right up in front of Thomas, close enough that their shoes were almost touching, and leaned forward until his face was maybe 8 inches from Thomas's face and just stared at him. Nose to nose, almost, grinning. Filming it. The crowd nearby had grown. People had stopped walking to watch, not the guard now, but this showdown, this performance. Some were laughing. Some looked uncomfortable. One older woman near me muttered something to her husband that I couldn't hear, but that looked, from the shape of her mouth, like disgraceful. Thomas's eyes stayed forward. But something happened to the skin just above his collar. A very slight flush. Not red, just a deepening. Like the heat was rising somewhere below the surface of him and pressing upward. His hands at his sides were in fists. They'd been in fists for a while, I realized. I just hadn't been looking at his hands. The third young man stayed in Thomas's face for about 45 seconds, long enough for the discomfort in the watching crowd to shift from amusement to something more uncertain. Then he pulled back, laughing, and turned to his friends. Got nothing, absolute robot. And they walked off. And the crowd dissolved back into its usual movement. And Thomas stood there, alone again, at his post, and I watched his jaw tighten, and then slowly, deliberately release. And the flush above his collar faded. And his hands, after a long moment, maybe 15 seconds, slowly, finger by finger, uncurled. Marta brought me a small piece of shortbread without asking. She'd seen me sitting there for over an hour by now. Does he ever? I started. Never, she said before I could finish the sentence. In 14 months, never. She looked out the window at him. My brother was a soldier, she said quietly. Not here, back home, I know what that face is. She tapped her own jaw, when you're trained to hold it. She went back to work. I sat with my shortbread and my cold coffee and I watched Thomas stand at his post in the October light, and I thought about what it costs. Not the physical cost, though that's real. Standing for 90 minutes in a bearskin hat is not comfortable, but the other cost. The one nobody talks about. The cost of being looked at without being seen. The cost of being content. I thought about that a lot. I'm still thinking about it. The thing nobody tells you about watching someone exercise extraordinary self-control is that it's exhausting to witness. I don't mean that in a self-centered way. I mean that there's something physiologically draining about watching another human being contain themselves, watching them absorb provocation after provocation and return nothing, because some part of your own nervous system keeps anticipating a release that never comes. You keep waiting for it. Your body is waiting for it. And when it doesn't happen, that waiting doesn't go away. It just accumulates. I imagine that accumulation is, by orders of magnitude, worse for the person doing the containing. By 10:15, I had watched Thomas be approached by 11 separate content creators. 11. I'd started keeping a rough tally on the corner of my notebook page, which was still otherwise blank. The interviews I'd missed had become, in my mind, a slightly abstract concern. What I was watching felt more important, though I couldn't have explained precisely why at the time. The crowd near the post ebbed and flowed. Tourists came and went in waves. A tour bus would arrive, deposit 30 or 40 people who would cluster and photograph and move on, and then there would be a lull for 4 or 5 minutes before the next wave. In the lulls, Thomas stood alone and the street felt briefly, strangely normal. In those moments I noticed his breathing changed. Not dramatically. You had to be watching carefully to see it. But in the lulls his chest rose and fell with a slightly fuller, slower rhythm. Like he was taking what air he could while nobody was making a performance out of him. I found that detail heartbreaking, though I kept that observation to myself at the time. The one who changed everything arrived at about 10:25. I noticed him before he approached the post because he was the most elaborately equipped person I'd seen all morning. This wasn't a tourist with a phone. This was a production. He had a camera crew. Well, crew is a generous word. It was one friend with a DSLR on a shoulder rig, and he himself had a wireless mic, a large portable ring light on a stand that his friend was also somehow managing alongside the camera, and a whole energy about him that I can only describe as professional amateur. The specific confidence of someone who has done this many times and believes that the number of times they've done it has conferred legitimacy on the thing itself. He was wearing a bright red hoodie. Whether this was coincidental or deliberate matching the guard's coat, I don't know, but it had the effect of drawing eyes. People noticed him before he even reached the post. He did a piece to camera on his approach, walking toward Thomas, talking into his microphone while his friend filmed from slightly behind his shoulder, catching Thomas in the background growing larger as they approached. So we're back at the palace, guys, and today we're really going to push it. I've got a whole list of things we're trying, and we're going to see how far we can go before. He stopped about 6 feet from Thomas and looked at him assessingly, like he was planning a root up a rock face. Okay, hello, sir. Or can I even call you sir? Can I call you mate? Nothing from Thomas. Mate it is, okay mate. He turned to his camera. Right, so first thing. He reached into his backpack and produced, I am not making this up, a pair of googly eyes on a headband. The kind you'd buy in a joke shop. He put them on his head so the googly eyes bounced above his forehead. Do I look like him now? Do I look like a guard? His friend laughed behind the camera. The nearby tourists, several of whom had stopped to watch, also laughed. Thomas looked straight ahead, through him, past him, at some fixed point in the middle distance that I'd come to think of as his anchor, the spot he'd chosen and returned to. The way a meditator returns to breath. This went on for several minutes. The red hoodie man, I'll call him Red because that's all I have, cycled through a series of bits. He had clearly prepared them. This was a script of a kind. He asked Thomas questions and narrated the non-answers for his audience. He stood beside him and did a pose-for-pose imitation. He produced a second rubber duck, an epidemic, apparently, and balanced it on his own head while standing next to Thomas. Through all of it, Thomas was stone. But here's what I was watching, in between the bits. Every time Red turned away to address his camera, every time the attention shifted off Thomas for even 4 or 5 seconds, Thomas blinked. Not a normal blink. A long, slow, deliberate blink, like someone releasing a breath they'd been holding underwater. Like the small, private moment of being human that he was only allowed in the gaps. And every time Red turned back, Thomas was already locked again. Forward still, contained. Those blinks are the thing I remember most clearly from the whole morning. Those moments of, I don't know how else to say it, of reclaiming himself in the parentheses of someone else's content. Red escalated. This is always the logic of it. I understand that now, having watched a lot of these videos since. The escalation is structural. Each bit that gets no reaction is a ladder rung that needs to be climbed. The point isn't really to get a reaction. The point is to go further than the last person, to be the most, to generate the most watchable version of this particular type of video. The guard's non-reaction is the point, but it also fuels the need for more. Red got closer. He started narrating in Thomas's ear, not shouting. Almost worse, speaking quietly and directly, like they were having a private conversation that Red was simultaneously broadcasting to thousands of strangers. Come on, mate, I know you're in there, must be so weird, yeah. Standing here every day, people doing this to you every day. Does it get old? Be honest. You can nod. I won't tell anyone. Thomas's jaw tightened. Red kept going. What do you think about when you're standing here? Do you just go blank? Is it like meditation? Because I tried meditating once and I lasted about 3 minutes before I checked my phone, so respect, genuinely, that's impressive. He laughed at his own commentary. His friend laughed. Some of the gathered crowd laughed. And then Red said something that I don't think he meant to be cruel. I think he said it because it was funny in his head, because it was the kind of line that would land in a caption, because he was performing, and the logic of performance sometimes outpaces the logic of basic decency. He leaned in close to Thomas's ear and said, loudly enough that I heard it from across the street, "Bet you wish you had a real job, mate." The laughter from his friend was immediate. The laughter from the crowd was slightly delayed and slightly less comfortable. Thomas's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been flat against his sides, curled, very slowly, both of them. And then he turned his head. Just slightly, maybe 15 degrees, not enough to be called a full turn, not the dramatic pivot that would have broken protocol, crossed a line, given Red exactly the clip he wanted, just a fraction, just enough. And he looked at Red. Not past him, not through him, at him. For 1 second, maybe 2. And what was in that look? I want to be careful here because I'm working from memory and memory is not always fair, and Thomas deserves fairness. What was in that look was not anger the way anger usually looks. It wasn't hot. It wasn't explosive. It was something much quieter and honestly much heavier. It was the look of a person who is deeply, profoundly tired of being a prop. It was the look of someone who has held their dignity intact through years of this, and who is, in this single moment, reminding another human being that dignity is being held, that it is a choice, that there is a person inside the uniform choosing, every single minute of every single day, to remain. It lasted 2 seconds at most. Then Thomas returned his gaze to the middle distance, back to the anchor point, back to the stillness. Red stopped speaking. For a moment, he genuinely stopped. The bravado dropped. He glanced at his camera, at his friend, and there was something uncertain in his face, the expression of a person who has been expecting a reaction and received a completely different one than they were prepared for. The crowd had gone quiet. Marta, I noticed, had come to stand in the doorway of the cafe. She'd seen it from inside. Red cleared his throat. He said to his camera in a slightly subdued voice, "Okay, so he looked at me, guys, did you catch that?" But the energy had shifted. The bit had lost its shape. He packed up his ring light, said something about more content later and walked off, faster than he'd arrived. The crowd dissipated. Thomas stood at his post. In the few minutes that followed, nobody approached him. I don't know if this was coincidence or whether some residual charge in the air from the 2-second exchange was keeping people at a respectful distance, but there was a quiet around him that hadn't been there all morning. I was still sitting in the window. My notebook was open in front of me, and I had written exactly one thing in it, at some point while I was watching, in handwriting that was not quite my usual handwriting. He's not performing stoicism, he is stoic, and there's a difference. I don't fully know what I meant by that when I wrote it. I've thought about it since. I think I meant something about authenticity, about how what Thomas was doing wasn't a performance of strength, wasn't a show of it, but was the actual thing, the real and costly and daily exercise of choosing to be larger than the situation, which is both less dramatic and far more impressive than anything I was watching on the phones around me. His rotation ended at about 10:40. Another guard came. I heard the footsteps before I saw him, the measured rhythm of the approach, and Thomas conducted the changeover with the precision and formality that the ceremony requires. Everything crisp, everything correct. Nothing in his bearing that showed the morning he'd had. And then he walked, not marched, walked. The ceremony was over, back through the gate and out of my sight. He was gone in 30 seconds. The new guard stood at the post, and within 3 minutes someone had a ring light in his face. The machine continues. I sat for another few minutes, looking at my blank notebook page and my cold coffee and the single sentence I'd written. Then I picked up my bag and walked out into the October air. It smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet, and exhaust fumes, and somewhere close by, someone was frying onions on a street cart. London smells, in the best possible way. I found out his name, Thomas, not from him. I wouldn't know him if I passed him in the street. I only saw his face from across a road. I found it from a small veteran support forum online, where someone I never found out who had posted a short piece about a guard at St. James's who had served 2 tours in an active conflict zone before returning to ceremonial duty. The post didn't give much detail. It wasn't trying to make a point. It was just someone who knew him mentioning, in passing, that he was one of the quietest people they'd ever met, but that he had a particular way of making you feel that your nonsense was being observed and filed. I read that and I thought, yes, that's exactly it. The nonsense is being observed and filed. And the file, I imagine, is getting thick.